The 2013 Oscar for the Best Cinematography.
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
Gravity. Emmanuel Lubezki.
Emmanuel Lubezki.
Emmanuel Lubezki, The Revenant.
Emmanuel Lubezki is one of the most decorated cinematographers currently working, having garnered 3 back-to-back Academy Awards for Best Cinematography, an unprecedented feat and something of a victory lap for a man who had become highly sought after by the time the 2010s rolled around. Cinematographers often take the backseat compared to the directors they work alongside, but Lubezki has the privilege of both being a gifted cameraman and having collaborated some of the finest filmmakers in and out of Hollywood: Alfonso Cuarón, Alejandro González Inarritu, Terrence Malick, Tim Burton, the Coen brothers, just to name a few. Lubezki started out, perhaps most consistently, as Cuarón's go-to cinematographer, with their careers basically starting out conjoined at the hip. With Cuarón's debut feature, Solo con tu pareja, in 1991, Lubezki was unleashed upon the world. Only not quite. He would work with Cuarón on several more films during the 90s, from A Little Princess, which nabbed Lubezki his first Oscar nomination in 1995, to Great Expectations in 1998. Lubezki would see his second nomination for Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow in 1999, although while Burton's super dark take on the Washington Irving short story is gorgeously heightened in its aesthetics, we don't see the hallmarks of Lubezki's style yet. We would have to wait until he was a good deal deeper into his career.
It was 18 years, 4 months, 20 days, 16 hours, and 8 minutes old.
Remember Children of Men? I didn't, for a long time. Alfonso Cuarón's near-future sci-fi thriller was a box office disappointment, but over time it's become one of the most well-regarded genre films of the 2000s, in no small part due to Lubezki's astounding camera work. While Terrence Malick's The New World, released the previous year, looks stunning in its own right, it was with Children of Men that Lubezki's signature style would bloom fully, namely his fondness for long-flowing takes. Without getting too specific, in the interest of spoilers, there's an iconic sequence in Children of Men where our heroes are in a car, and so is the camera. However, the action heats up when a gang of bandits ambushes the car, and the action alternates between inside and the exterior, in a single shot that lasts 3 or 4 takes. Children of Men is not exactly an action movie, but the ingenuity of Lubezki's work gives it more energy than most, which properly fits in the genre.
There are 2 ways through life. The way of nature and the way of grace.
Lubezki was somewhat productive in the 2000s, picking up 2 more Oscar nods along the way. It was a real turning point for him, in that not only would he produce some of his best work with Cuarón, but he would also start his fruitful relationship with Terrence Malick. Sure enough, Children of Men and Malick's The New World would supply the 2 extra Oscar nominations. And, in my humble opinion, Lubezki should have won for Children of Men. All due respect to Guillermo Navarro and his work on Pan's Labyrinth, of course.
This is some senior guy who screwed the pooch.
This could put a big dent in my surgeries.
Big time.
Speaking of nominations that should have been wins, Lubezki went on sort of a mini hiatus after working on Burn After Reading, one of the more overlooked Coen brother movies, returning in 2011 with Malick's The Tree of Life. A little personal, but I remember watching The Tree of Life a good decade ago with my mother. Neither of us understood what was happening. It was an impeccable work of visual storytelling, though, especially in Lubezki's freely flowing camera work and the mostly practical effects by the late Douglas Trumbull. The Tree of Life is the kind of movie that deserves its own retrospective piece someday, but for now, I'll say that if you go into it as a purely emotional experience and not as a conventional film narrative, you won't be disappointed.
Explorer's been hit.
As impressive as The Tree of Life is, though, Lubezki's first Oscar win would come along with his most frequent collaborator, Alfonso Cuarón, who himself was coming out of a rather lengthy hiatus. Gravity isn't talked about too much nowadays. I suspect because it's the kind of movie that's inexplicably connected with the big screen. You would have to have seen it either in the theater or on the biggest TV you can imagine. While it's certainly more of a visual effects showcase, the cinematography of Gravity is no slouch. Indeed, hosting one of Lubezki's most impressive long takes in its opening sequence, a shot which lasts about 12 minutes. Most of the film is a one-woman show, with Sandra Bullock performing what feels like a lopsided dance with the elements of space, replicated convincingly both through the VFX and the elaborate camera rig used to give one the impression of movement in zero gravity. While it has not but the bare bones of a plot, Gravity is undoubtedly a technical marvel, winning awards pretty much everywhere for its visual effects, sound design, directing, being Cuarón's first Oscar win for Best Director, and cinematography, with Lubezki getting his first Oscar.
How did we end up here? This place is horrible. Smells like balls.
The 2010s would see Lubezki hopping back and forth between the directors he clearly loves working with most. From Alex to the Wonder in 2012 to what would earn him his second Oscar win, with Alejandro González Inarritu's Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance in 2014. Inarritu had previously made waves in the art house world with award winners like Amores Perros and Pebel.
In the beginning, all the Lord's people.
But Birdman would be his breakthrough in the mainstream. With an all-star cast, including a surprisingly intense performance by Zach Galifianakis, and a genre-bending screenplay which turned its vengeful eye won The Rise of Superhero Movies, Birdman was all but destined to be a critical darling. The central gimmick of the film, that being the illusion of it all being shot in a single take, was achieved in takes roughly 15 minutes apiece, with most of the action being set in the rooms and floors of a theater. While it's easy to write off the gimmick as just showing off for Lubezki and Inarritu, the film location invokes an all-in-one take approach. It's like watching a live performance without any cuts or fade-outs. Lubezki's disembodied camera works in tandem with Antonio Sanchez's percussion-heavy jazz score to give us a movie that, love or hate it, feels entirely like its own beast. With Birdman, Lubezki had become the most undisputed master of camera movement, and his streak would continue with his follow-up. Well, he actually had 3 films out in 2015. Firstly, we would have Malick's Night of Cups, a largely unscripted fever dream that strips away what little plot The Tree of Life would have had. Next is Last Days in the Desert, a biblical movie about Jesus' 40 days in the desert, which, despite Ewan McGregor's spirited lead performance, is little more than a pit stop for Lubezki.
I'm talking to you.
No, the big release of 2015 would be Lubezki's next collaboration with Inarritu, The Reverend. Whereas Birdman was a fantastical drama comedy, The Reverend is a brutal and ice-cold western, more in the tradition of James Fenimore Copper's Leather Stocking Tales than your typical John Wayne movie. Like with Birdman, however, there is a gimmick at play here which shows Inarritu and Lubezki's testing their skills. This time, a strict call, with 1 or 2 exceptions for naturalistic lighting. Lubezki shot The Reverend with virtually no artificial lighting, instead relying on certain hours of the day to achieve the soft lighting and hazy look we would see in the finished product. Despite behind-the-scenes drama on set, and a budget that inflated basically 2 blockbuster levels, The Reverend won awards for Lubezki and Inarritu, with Lubezki winning his 3rd consecutive Oscar for Best Cinematography.
We thought we could just roll and tumble, live from song to song, kiss to kiss.
After Song to Song, which had been shot years earlier, in 2017, Lubezki more or less went silent. The 2010s were a highly prolific time for him, never mind the back-to-back Oscar wins. Lubezki had already taken a 3-year break between Burn After Reading and The Tree of Life, so this was not unprecedented. Even so, Lubezki's absence in the final years in the 2010s were sorely felt. However, after 5 years, he is finally returning as the director of photography for David O. Russell's upcoming feature, Canterbury Glass. Not only is Russell directing, but Hildur Gondadottir, known for her work on Joker and Chernobyl, is in charge of the score. Personally, even as someone who hasn't watched a David O. Russell movie with enthusiasm since Silver Linings Playbook, I must say I'm a little hyped for this. Canterbury Glass is set to release in November 2022, and it looks like a crime drama that you ought not to miss. Emmanuel Lubezki has been active in the field for over 30 years, and has been a master for the past 15. While he showed himself to be more than just competent from the start, it took a while for him to find his own style. The quick and fluid camera movements, the long takes, the sense of naturalism that permeates even the most outlandish premises, there have been so many great cinematographers throughout cinema's history, including several who are currently among us. But I can't think of any, not even the great Roger Deakins, who are as flashy and relentlessly kinetic as Emmanuel Lubezki.